The morning mist hung thick over the Euphrates River as Lieutenant Sarah Martinez adjusted her ghillie suit among the reeds. She had been lying motionless for 14 hours, her Barrett M82 rifle positioned perfectly between two fallen logs that had washed ashore during the spring floods. The camouflage was so complete that even the fish swimming below seemed unaware of her presence. 3 miles downstream, Alpha team of Navy SEALs moved through the abandoned village of Al-Rashid like shadows in the pre-dawn darkness. Team leader Commander Jake "Hammer" Thompson raised his fist, bringing his 5-man unit to an immediate halt behind a crumbling concrete wall. Intelligence reports indicated that high-value target Khalid al-Masri would be moving through this sector at sunrise, accompanied by a convoy of heavily armed militants. Sarah's voice crackled softly through their encrypted comm system. Overwatch in position. I have eyes on the primary route. No movement detected yet. The SEALs had been briefed about their sniper support, but none of them had met Martinez in person. In the special operations community, she was known simply as Ghost, a nickname earned through 2 tours in Afghanistan, where she had eliminated over 40 high-value targets without ever being detected by enemy forces. Her reputation preceded her, but her identity remained largely mysterious to most ground teams. Commander Thompson pressed his earpiece. Copy, Overwatch. We're moving to secondary positions. Maintain surveillance on grid reference 4-7 Alpha. What the SEALs didn't know was that Sarah had arrived at her position 3 days earlier, moving under cover of darkness and establishing a hide so sophisticated that it appeared to be nothing more than natural debris along the riverbank. She had calculated wind patterns, tidal movements, and even the migration paths of local bird species to ensure her concealment would remain perfect. The village of Al-Rashid had been evacuated 6 months prior due to ongoing terrorist activity in the region. Its narrow streets and abandoned buildings provided perfect cover for militant operations, making it an ideal location for high-value targets to move through while avoiding coalition air assets. The local terrain was challenging, open desert to the north and east, with the Euphrates River creating a natural barrier to the south and west. As the first rays of sunlight began to pierce the morning mist, Sarah detected movement through her scope. A small boat appeared around the river bend, moving slowly upstream against the current. Through her high-powered optics, she could see 3 individuals aboard, 2 manning the boat, while a third sat in the center, partially concealed under a canvas tarp. Overwatch to Alpha Team. Possible target vessel approaching from the southeast. Single passenger undercover, 2 crew members visible. Commander Thompson and his team had positioned themselves in 3 separate buildings overlooking the main road that ran parallel to the river. The plan was simple. If al-Masri's convoy appeared as intelligence predicted, they would initiate a controlled ambush while their sniper provided overwatch and eliminated any threats attempting to escape toward the river. Petty Officer First Class Marcus Doc Williams, the team's medic and secondary marksman, settled into position behind a second-story window. Through his own scope, he scanned the opposite bank of the river but saw nothing unusual, just the natural debris and vegetation that had accumulated along the waterline over years of seasonal flooding. I don't see our angel, Doc whispered into his comm. Overwatch. Can you confirm your position? Sarah smiled slightly beneath her face paint. Even trained SEALs with high-quality optics couldn't spot her from 200 meters away. I'm right where I need to be. Document trust the process. The boat continued its approach, and Sarah began to notice subtle details that concerned her. The passenger under the tarp was significantly larger than the average local civilian, and one of the crew members appeared to be scanning the shoreline with what looked like military-grade binoculars. This wasn't a simple fishing expedition or civilian transport. Through her scope, she observed the boat's wake pattern and engine noise signature. The vessel was moving with purpose, following a specific course that would bring it directly past the village. Sarah had studied hundreds of hours of surveillance footage from this area, and this boat's behavior didn't match normal civilian traffic patterns. Alpha Team, be advised. Target vessel is exhibiting suspicious navigation patterns. Recommend heightened alert status. Commander Thompson acknowledged the warning and signaled his team to prepare for potential contact. The original mission parameters had focused on the expected road convoy, but fluid battlefield conditions required constant adaptation. If Al-Masri was attempting to exfiltrate via river transport instead of ground vehicles, their entire operational approach would need to shift. Sarah's training kicked in as she began calculating new firing solutions. The moving boat presented a more complex target than a stationary convoy, requiring her to account for the vessel's speed, the current's effect on bullet trajectory, and the possibility of civilian casualties if her intelligence proved incorrect. The morning sun continued to rise, burning off more of the river mist and improving visibility. Sarah could now clearly see that the passenger under the tarp was wearing tactical gear and carried what appeared to be an AK-47 rifle. This was definitely not a civilian vessel. As the boat approached the village perimeter, Sarah noticed something that made her blood run cold. A second boat had appeared upstream, moving much faster and clearly attempting to intercept the first vessel. Through her scope, she could see muzzle flashes as the occupants of both boats opened fire on each other. Alpha Team, we have a developing situation on the water. Two vessels engaged in active combat. Unknown if our primary target is involved, but recommend immediate reposition to maintain tactical advantage. The SEALs quickly adapted to the changing situation. Commander Thompson split his team, sending 2 operators to maintain overwatch on the road, while the remaining 3 moved toward the riverbank to better assess the naval engagement unfolding before them. What none of them realized was that Sarah had already identified their primary target. The man under the tarp in the first boat was indeed Khalid al-Masri, and he was currently engaged in a firefight with a rival faction that had apparently learned of his movement plans. The situation was rapidly evolving into a 3-way engagement that would test every aspect of their training and adaptability. Sarah steadied her breathing and began calculating the complex firing solution needed to eliminate al-Masri while he was aboard a moving vessel engaged in active combat. The shot would require precision beyond what most snipers ever attempted, but she had trained for exactly these types of scenarios. The first boat suddenly veered toward shore as its engine took multiple hits from the pursuing vessel. Al-Masri and his crew were attempting to reach the riverbank where they could take cover among the village buildings. Sarah realized this was her opportunity. Once the target moved to dry land, the tactical situation would become significantly more manageable. Through her earpiece, she heard Commander Thompson's voice. "Overwatch, we need you too." The transmission was cut short by the sound of automatic weapons fire echoing across the water. The second boat had closed distance and was now attempting to ram the first vessel. Sarah watched through her scope as al-Masri raised his rifle and returned fire, his shots accurate enough to force the pursuing boat to alter course. The first boat struck the muddy riverbank with enough force to throw its occupants forward. Al-Masri recovered quickly, grabbing his weapon and a small backpack before leaping onto shore. His 2 crew members were slower to react, and Sarah could see that one had been wounded in the exchange of gunfire. This was the moment she had been waiting for. Al-Masri was now on foot, moving through terrain she had studied extensively, with clear lines of sight from her concealed position. Sarah adjusted her scope and began tracking the target as he moved toward the village buildings where the SEAL team was positioned. The wounded crew member from al-Masri's boat was struggling to reach shore, while the second boat continued circling in the river, its occupants apparently deciding whether to pursue their target on land or retreat to fight another day. Sarah knew that the next few minutes would determine the success or failure of their entire mission. Al-Masri moved with the confidence of someone familiar with the area, taking cover behind specific buildings and using predetermined routes that suggested he had planned for this exact contingency. Sarah realized that their intelligence had been partially compromised. The target knew coalition forces were operating in the area and had prepared multiple escape routes accordingly. As she tracked al-Masri through her scope, Sarah noticed something that made her pause. The target was moving directly toward the building where Petty Officer Williams was positioned. If al-Masri continued on his current path, he would discover the SEAL's position within minutes, potentially compromising the entire team. Sarah keyed her radio. "Doc, you've got company coming your way. Recommend immediate displacement to alternate position." But, as she spoke, she realized that Williams couldn't move without exposing himself to the militants still circling in the boat offshore. The SEAL was trapped between Al-Masri approaching from one direction and hostile fire from the river on the other side. Sarah's finger moved to her trigger as she realized Doc Williams was walking into a deadly trap. Al-Masri had stopped his advance and was now studying the building where the SEAL was positioned, clearly having spotted something that didn't belong. The terrorist leader raised his rifle slowly, taking careful aim at the second-story window. Through her scope, Sarah could see the tension in Al-Masri's shoulders as he prepared to fire. She had perhaps 3 seconds before he would eliminate one of America's finest warriors. The shot distance was 847 meters across moving water with a crosswind that had shifted twice in the last 10 minutes. It was a shot that would challenge even the most experienced snipers under perfect conditions. Sarah exhaled slowly and squeezed the trigger. The Barrett M82's massive .50 caliber round crossed the distance in just over a second, but Al-Masri had moved at the last moment, diving behind a concrete barrier as if some sixth sense had warned him of impending danger. The bullet struck the building corner where he had been standing, sending chunks of concrete flying in all directions. "Sniper!" Al-Masri shouted to his remaining crew member. Across the river, in the debris, Sarah cursed silently as she realized her carefully constructed hide had been compromised. Al-Masri was clearly more experienced than their intelligence had indicated. Most targets would have panicked after coming under sniper fire, but this man was calmly analyzing the situation and directing an effective response. The wounded crew member from Al-Masri's boat had managed to reach shore and was now providing covering fire toward the SEAL positions while his leader attempted to locate the sniper. Meanwhile, the second boat had decided to join the fight, moving closer to shore and adding their automatic weapons to the growing battle. Commander Thompson's voice crackled through the radio. "Overwatch, we're taking fire from multiple directions. Can you neutralize the boat crew?" Sarah was already adjusting her position, knowing that staying in one place after being spotted was a death sentence. She low-crawled 20 meters downstream to a secondary hide she had prepared, dragging her rifle and equipment with practiced efficiency. The movement took her almost 3 minutes, during which the firefight intensified dramatically. Doc Williams had been forced to abandon his Overwatch position and was now engaged in close-quarters combat with Al-Masri's crew member on the ground floor of his building. The sound of rifle fire and shouting echoed across the water as both men fought for tactical advantage in the narrow corridors. From her new position, Sarah could see that the situation was deteriorating rapidly. Al-Masri had used the distraction of the ground battle to move closer to the SEAL team's main position, and the boat crew was providing effective suppressing fire that prevented the Americans from maneuvering freely. Sarah lined up her shot on the boat's engine block. Disabling their mobility would force them to either retreat or come ashore where the SEALs could deal with them more effectively. The Barrett's powerful round punched through the boat's hull just below the waterline, causing immediate flooding but not the catastrophic engine failure she had hoped for. The boat crew responded by turning their full attention to her position, raking the riverbank with automatic weapons fire. Sarah pressed herself flat against the mud as bullets snapped overhead, some coming close enough that she could feel the displaced air. Her ghillie suit was taking hits, but the thick vegetation and fallen logs were providing adequate protection for the moment. Through the chaos of the firefight, Sarah heard something that made her blood freeze. Children's voices, crying and shouting in Arabic. She raised her scope and scanned the village, realizing with horror that several local families had returned to recover belongings from their abandoned homes and were now trapped in the crossfire. Alpha Team, be advised. Civilian families present in the target area. Repeat, civilians on the ground, including children. This complicated everything. The SEALs couldn't use their heavier weapons or call for air support with innocents in the area, and Sarah's own engagement options were now severely limited. Al-Masri had undoubtedly planned for this contingency, using civilian shields as part of his escape strategy. Commander Thompson made the difficult decision that every special operations leader dreads. All units, weapons hold on area targets. Precision fire only. Protect the civilians. Sarah watched through her scope as Al-Masri grabbed a young boy who appeared to be about 8 years old, using the child as a human shield while he moved toward a motorcycle that had been hidden behind one of the buildings. The terrorist's tactical brilliance was becoming increasingly apparent. He had contingency plans for every aspect of his escape route. The boy's mother was screaming and trying to follow, but al-Masri's wounded crew member was keeping her at bay with his rifle. Sarah realized she was witnessing a kidnapping in progress, and once al-Masri reached that motorcycle with his human shield, he would likely escape into the desert where coalition forces would have little chance of tracking him. Sarah began calculating an impossible shot. She needed to eliminate al-Masri without harming the child, while the target was moving erratically and using the boy's body to shield his vital areas. The angle was wrong, the distance was extreme, and any miscalculation would result in the death of an innocent child. Through her earpiece, she heard Doc Williams engaging al-Masri's crew member in hand-to-hand combat. The sound of the struggle was intense but brief, ending with Williams confirming that he had neutralized the threat. One enemy down, but the primary target was still moving toward escape with his young hostage. The boat crew had managed to beach their vessel and were now providing overwatch for al-Masri's escape attempt. Sarah realized she had perhaps 30 seconds before the terrorist leader reached the motorcycle and disappeared into the vast desert landscape beyond the village. Sarah made a decision that would haunt her for years to come. Instead of attempting the nearly impossible shot on al-Masri, she turned her rifle toward the motorcycle itself. If she could disable the vehicle, it would force him to choose between maintaining his human shield and finding another escape route. The .50 caliber round struck the motorcycle's fuel tank, causing a spectacular explosion that sent flaming fuel in all directions. Al-Masri was thrown backward by the blast, temporarily losing his grip on the boy, who immediately ran toward his mother's voice. But the terrorist leader recovered quickly, rolling behind cover and drawing a pistol. Sarah could see blood on his face from shrapnel wounds, but he was still combat effective and now extremely angry. He began moving toward the family of civilians, clearly intending to grab another hostage. Commander Thompson and his remaining team members were advancing through the village, but they were still too far away to intervene directly. The boat crew was maintaining effective suppressing fire, and Sarah realized she was the only one in position to prevent a massacre. She lined up her shot carefully, waiting for the moment when al-Masri would expose himself enough for a clean hit that wouldn't endanger the civilians. The terrorist was clever, though, using the family as shields while he maneuvered toward another escape route he had apparently prepared. Sarah noticed something odd about al-Masri's movement pattern. He wasn't just trying to escape. He was leading the family toward a specific building that looked different from the others. As she studied it through her scope, she realized what she was seeing: an improvised explosive device. Alpha Team, the target is moving civilians toward an IED. Northwest corner building, approximately 200 meters from your position. Commander Thompson immediately changed his team's approach vector, but they were still too far away to reach the family before al-Masri could trigger whatever explosive device he had prepared. Sarah realized she was looking at a worst-case scenario where the terrorist leader intended to kill multiple civilians along with any coalition forces who came to their aid. The boat crew suddenly ceased fire and began retreating back into the river, apparently having received some signal from al-Masri that indicated his final plan was about to be executed. Sarah understood that she was witnessing a carefully orchestrated operation designed to inflict maximum casualties on both military and civilian targets. Through her scope, she watched al-Masri force the family toward the building while keeping his pistol trained on the father. The man was pleading in Arabic, clearly understanding that they were being led to their deaths, but powerless to resist with his wife and children being threatened. Sarah made the most difficult decision of her military career. She turned her rifle away from al-Masri and instead aimed at the IED trigger mechanism she could just make out in the building's window. It was an incredibly small target at maximum range, but if she could destroy the detonator, it might give the SEAL team enough time to reach the civilians. Her first shot missed the trigger device by inches, striking the window frame and alerting al-Masri to her new target priority. The terrorist leader immediately began dragging the family faster toward the building, understanding that his tactical advantage was disappearing. Sarah's second shot was perfect, destroying the visible trigger mechanism in a shower of sparks and debris. But As she watched through her scope, she realized with growing horror that al-Masri was holding what appeared to be a backup detonator in his free hand. The terrorist leader looked directly toward her concealed position and smiled, as if he could see her through her perfect camouflage. Then, he raised the detonator above his head, clearly intending to trigger the explosion regardless of his own survival. Sarah had one final shot before al-Masri could complete his murderous plan. The distance was at the absolute limit of her rifle's effective range, the target was partially concealed, and the consequences of missing were unthinkable. Every aspect of her training, every hour of practice, every successful mission in her career had led to this single moment. She steadied her breathing, compensated for wind and distance, and squeezed the trigger for what she knew might be the most important shot of her life. The bullet traveled 847 meters in 1.2 seconds, spinning through the morning air with deadly precision. Sarah watched through her scope as the massive .50 caliber round struck Khalid al-Masri in the upper chest, the impact lifting him off his feet and sending the detonator flying harmlessly into the dirt 15 feet away. The terrorist leader's body hit the ground with a finality that marked the end of his reign of terror across 3 countries. The civilian family stood frozen for a moment, unable to comprehend that their nightmare was suddenly over, before the father gathered his wife and children and ran toward the approaching SEAL team. Commander Thompson's voice crackled through Sarah's earpiece. Outstanding shot, Overwatch. Target is down, civilians are safe. What's your status? Sarah remained motionless in her hide, scanning the area for additional threats while her heart rate slowly returned to normal. The boat crew had disappeared around the river bend, apparently deciding that discretion was the better part of valor once their leader was eliminated. The immediate tactical situation was secure, but Sarah knew better than to assume the mission was complete. Overwatch is green. Maintaining surveillance while you process the scene. Recommend explosive ordnance disposal team for that building before anyone gets too close. Doc Williams emerged from the village carrying his medical kit, immediately moving to check on the family that al-Masri had terrorized. The youngest child, a girl who couldn't have been more than 5 years old, was crying in her mother's arms. But there appeared to be no physical injuries among any of the civilians. Sarah began the careful process of extracting from her position. After nearly 18 hours in the same location, her muscles were stiff and cramped, but she moved with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done this countless times before. Every piece of equipment had to be accounted for, every trace of her presence eliminated. As she packed her ghillie suit, Sarah reflected on the complexity of the engagement. What had begun as a routine convoy interdiction had evolved into a multifaceted operation involving naval combat, hostage rescue, and explosive ordnance disposal. It was exactly the type of fluid battlefield situation that separated elite special operations forces from conventional military units. 20 minutes later, Sarah emerged from the riverside vegetation, her appearance so sudden that it startled Petty Officer Second Class Tony Breacher Rodriguez, who was pulling security for the team. Even knowing approximately where their sniper had been positioned, he hadn't seen her until she was standing directly in front of him. "Jesus, ghost," Rodriguez muttered. "You were really down there the whole time?" Sarah smiled and adjusted her equipment load. "Right where I needed to be, Tony. How's the family doing?" "Doc says they're shaken up, but physically fine. The father keeps asking for the name of the sniper who saved his children. He wants to thank you personally." Sarah shook her head firmly. "Operational security, Rodriguez. He doesn't need to know who pulled the trigger, just that American forces were here to help." Commander Thompson approached, having completed his initial assessment of the scene. Behind him, Sarah could see al-Masri's body being photographed and processed by the team's intelligence specialist. The terrorist leader who had orchestrated attacks across 3 countries and killed dozens of innocent civilians was finally being held accountable for his crimes. "Martinez, that was some of the finest long-range shooting I've ever witnessed," Thompson said. "The shot placement was perfect, and your tactical awareness probably prevented a civilian massacre. Outstanding work." Sarah accepted the praise with the quiet professionalism that characterized most elite snipers. "Just doing my job, sir. Though I have to say, al-Masri was more tactically sophisticated than our intelligence indicated." He had contingencies prepared for almost every scenario we threw at him. Thompson nodded grimly. That's what made him so dangerous. Intelligence estimates he was responsible for training dozens of other cell leaders across the region. With him eliminated, we've potentially disrupted multiple terrorist networks that were still in development. As the team prepared for extraction, Sarah noticed the father of the rescued family speaking earnestly with Doc Williams, gesturing repeatedly toward the river where she had been concealed. Williams was clearly trying to explain operational security requirements while still acknowledging the man's gratitude. Sarah made a decision that went against standard protocol, but felt necessary given the circumstances. She approached the family, removing her helmet so they could see her face clearly for the first time. The father's eyes widened as he realized that the sniper who had saved his children was a woman. In his culture, female warriors were respected but rare, and he had never expected that his family's salvation would come from an American woman soldier. "Shukran," he said simply, placing his hand over his heart in the traditional gesture of deep gratitude. Sarah responded in Arabic, her pronunciation careful but clear, "La shukra ala wajib." No thanks necessary for doing one's duty. The man's wife stepped forward and spoke rapidly in Arabic, tears streaming down her face as she gestured toward her children. Sarah's understanding of the language was limited, but the emotion was universal. This was a mother expressing gratitude for her children's lives. Doc Williams provided translation. She's saying that her children will grow up knowing that American soldiers risked their lives to protect them. She wants them to remember that there are good people in the world who fight against evil. Sarah felt the weight of that responsibility settling on her shoulders. These children would carry the memory of this day for the rest of their lives, and their understanding of America and its military would be shaped by how she and her teammates had conducted themselves during the most terrifying moments of their young lives. As the extraction helicopter approached, Sarah took one final look at the riverbank where she had spent the last 18 hours. The hide she had constructed was already being reclaimed by nature, and within a few days, there would be no trace that a sniper had ever been positioned there. The successful elimination of Khalid al-Masri would undoubtedly make headlines in intelligence circles, but Sarah knew that the real story would never be told publicly. The tactical complexity of the engagement, the split-second decisions that had saved civilian lives, and the individual heroism of each team member would remain classified for years to come. During the helicopter ride back to base, Sarah sat quietly while the rest of the team conducted their initial after-action review. Al-Masri's death would create a power vacuum in the regional terrorist network, but it would also likely prompt retaliation attacks as various factions fought to claim leadership of his organization. Commander Thompson interrupted her thoughts by handing her a secure satellite phone. "Colonel Mitchell wants to speak with you personally." Colonel James Mitchell commanded the Joint Special Operations Task Force for the entire theater, and Sarah had only spoken with him twice in her 3 years of deployment. She accepted the phone with some curiosity about what would warrant a direct call from such a high-ranking officer. "Outstanding work today, Martinez." Colonel Mitchell's voice was clear despite the distance. "The intelligence value of al-Masri's elimination cannot be overstated, but, more importantly, you prevented what could have been a significant civilian casualty event. The family you saved today will remember American professionalism and dedication for generations." Sarah responded professionally, "Thank you, sir." The entire team performed exceptionally under difficult circumstances. "That's exactly the type of humility I've come to expect from you, Martinez. However, I want you to understand that your actions today will have strategic implications far beyond the immediate tactical success. We've been working to build relationships with local communities, and preventing that civilian massacre while eliminating a major terrorist leader sends exactly the message we need to convey." As the helicopter continued toward base, Sarah reflected on the colonel's words. Military success was often measured in terms of targets eliminated and objectives achieved, but the human element, the family that would go home safely, the children who would grow up with their parents, was equally important even if it couldn't be quantified in official reports. 3 weeks later, Sarah received word that the father of the rescued family had named his newborn son Amir, which meant commander in Arabic, in honor of the American soldiers who had saved his family. It was a gesture that meant more to Sarah than any official commendation or medal she might receive. The Riverbank operation would become a case study in advanced sniper tactics, taught at special operations schools for years afterward. But, for Sarah Martinez, it would always be remembered as the day when 18 hours of patient preparation and one perfect shot at maximum range had prevented a tragedy and reminded her why she had chosen to serve her country in the shadows, unknown and unrecognized by most of the people whose lives she protected. Years later, when reporters would ask about the female snipers who served in Iraq and Afghanistan, Sarah's name would never appear in public records. But, in a small village along the Euphrates River, a family would tell their children about the day when America's finest warriors risked everything to protect innocent lives, and how sometimes the most important battles are won not by the famous or the celebrated, but by professionals who simply do their duty when duty calls.